Good evening. Welcome to the PWSA USA webinar series. Tonight's topic is the clinical trials featuring the Phase 2 and 3 studies of Beloranib, presented by representatives from Zafgen Pharmaceutical, who will do their own introductions in just a moment. Dr. Jennifer Miller, who for most of our families needs no introduction. She's an endocrinologist at Shands Hospital in the University of Florida. And Mr. Mark Lister from Behavioral Systems in Gainesville, Florida. Before we dive into this evening's topic, let's review some housekeeping notes. Please take a moment to write down the dial-in number and access code for tonight's presentation should you become disconnected from the call. The number is 646-307-1720, and the access code is 736-422-277. Those of you using the voice IP option may choose the option of dialing in at any time during the presentation. There is a question segment planned towards the end of the presentation. Please note that the dialog box located to the right of your screen has an option for you to ask questions throughout the presentation so that nothing is forgotten. Your line is muted to alleviate distractions, so if you have difficulties during the presentation or need assistance, please use this question box throughout, and I will be happy to provide assistance as best I can. Do not use the chat box, use the question box. If this dialog box is distracting to you, you can click the orange box to minimize it, then click the same arrow to open the box back up and enter questions or comments. Without further delay, I would like to introduce Dr. Dennis Kim from Zafgen Pharmaceuticals.
Thanks so much. And I want to thank also everyone for joining in tonight's webinar. I know that it's not easy to do this during the weekday, especially in the evening time. Would also love to thank PWSA for organizing this webinar and inviting us to speak about this important clinical trial called PWS. As you can see in the slide, the code name for the study is VAF311, and it's been branded as PWS. For those of you that may not be on this call or may not have a speaking part for now, you might want to mute your line. This is a Phase 3 trial for studying a drug called Beloranib in patients with Prader-Willi syndrome. Phase 3 trial means that it's the last set of studies before the FDA will look at the results and evaluate whether or not the drug is safe and efficacious enough to warrant a marketing approval, at which point, if the approval is granted, then the drug will be available for prescription usage. So what I'll do is take a few minutes to step through this study that's ongoing right now and pass it over to Dr. Jennifer Miller for some comments for her to make. So with that, could you advance to the next slide, please? So this is a team that we have on the line right now that will help answer questions and also in just any discussions that might come up. And I'll introduce the four of us. Tom Hughes is our Chief Executive Officer. I myself, Dennis Kim, I'm the Chief Medical Officer. I'm an endocrinologist by training. Alicia Secor is also on the phone, and she's our Chief Commercial Officer. And Alice Chen, our Director of Clinical Operations, is our clinical study operations guru that will also help us answer any questions that you might have. Next slide, please. So again, going back to the Phase 3 study, also known as BEST PWS trial, this is the overall kind of, review of the high-level design of the study. This is a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, which means that during the conduct of the main part of the trial, nobody knows if the patient is on drug or on placebo. Placebo being oftentimes just a sugar pill, but since this is an injectable drug, patients randomized to receive placebo will receive essentially just saline solution without any drug in it as an injection. So that means we don't know as a sponsor of the study your investigator or the study coordinators do not know who's on drug and who's on placebo, and of course patients and parents won't know either. So everyone will be blinded. That's what's called double-blinded trial. We are looking to enroll 102 patients across 15 study sites in the United States. And eligible patients will be assigned to one of the 3 arms in the study. We're testing 2 doses in this trial, 2.4 milligrams of Beloranib or 1.8 milligrams of Beloranib or placebo. So 34 patients in each arm, totaling 102 patients. The drug will be given as a subcutaneous injection or just under the skin twice weekly by either the study site staff or a home health nurse that will come out to the patient's home to deliver the drug and prepare the drug and administer it. Next slide, please. The objectives of the study, the things that we want to see or to accomplish after the study is done. Primarily, we want to see if the drug is effective in reducing body weight in patients with Prader-Willi syndrome and also hyperphagia-related behaviors. And what we mean by this is maladaptive behaviors that's related to food. So things like throwing temper tantrums when denied food, or stealing food, or getting very angry when not having access to food, and things like that. We'll measure the level of hyperphagia by using a questionnaire instrument that's been used in this field of study for a long time. Some of the secondary objectives will include total body mass and fat mass as measured by what's called the DEXA scan. DEXA scan is usually used in the clinical medicine setting to measure bone mineral density for patients who may have osteoporosis. I think many of you may be familiar with this already because DEXA scans can also measure fat content and lean body mass, and this is something that's done clinically oftentimes in patients with Prader-Willi syndrome to follow how they're doing in terms of their body composition. We'll also measure some laboratory markers that are important for health, such as cholesterol profiles, LDL cholesterol, also known as bad cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, known as good cholesterol, triglyceride, which make up some of the other cholesterol particles that we all have, amongst other things that we didn't all list here, but these are some of the highlights of the objectives. Next slide, please. And further going into study design, the study drug or placebo will be given in a double-blinded fashion, as I mentioned before, for about 6 months of treatment. And as I mentioned also before, doses will be administered twice weekly as a subcutaneous injection just under the skin, just like a growth hormone injection or an insulin injection. And patients who complete this 6 months of randomized treatment, a portion of the trial, will be offered an open label extension for another 6 months, where all patients will receive Beloranib for 6 additional months in what we call open label setting, which is to say that everyone will know that they are receiving drug, and it'll no longer be double-blinded at this point. So patients may have an opportunity to receive study drug for up to 12 months if they were randomized to receive Beloranib during the first 6 months. And even patients who were randomized to receive placebo for the first 6 months will have an opportunity to receive drug for the last 6 months. So this is an important part of the trial because I believe that it not only provides kind of a real-world experience with the drug, but also it provides an incentive for patients who may have been randomized to placebo for the first 6 months to stick with the study so they can benefit, hopefully, by receiving the drug during the last 6 months. Next slide, please. So whenever a study like this is conducted, we look for certain types of patients that we believe, and the FDA also agrees, that is safe and appropriate to study patient population like this. So as an extreme example, if somebody had a very bad heart disease, it's probably not a good idea for that patient to participate in a study with an experimental drug that's being tested. We usually look for patients with fairly stable health and fairly healthy status without having a lot of concomitant problems that may be fluctuating at the time of the study. So with that background, some of the highlights of the eligibility criteria are listed here and in the next few slides. We are looking for males and females in the ages 12 and 65 with a confirmed genetic diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome. And we are looking for obese patients, or patients who carry a lot of excess body fat. And by this, we care about this because one of the things we're trying to establish.
He's coming over in about 15, 20 minutes.
Hey, Alicia, you might want to mute yourself. So we care about this because one of the things that we're looking for the drug to do is lower body weight. And that's obviously not easy to do in patients who may have normal body weight at baseline. So we're looking for patients who carry excess body fat. And by this, we mean for adults, body mass index of greater than 30 and less than 60. Body mass index as measured by or as calculated by kilograms of body weight divided by height in meters squared. And you can go to many websites and calculate your own BMI easily by entering your weight and height. Oftentimes you can do so in pounds and feet and inches because the calculator will oftentimes just convert those automatically. So I encourage many of you who are interested in participating to find out what your child or your patient's BMI is. And for adolescents, age 12 to 17, we are defining this as BMI greater than 95th percentile for age and gender-matched individuals or population. And for this, it's a little bit more complicated calculating where you might fall on this line. So for this, I would recommend that you talk to your physician or your study site to see if you might qualify. We are looking to have one consistent primary caregiver who is able to evaluate behavioral changes for the patient through the duration of the trial. Again, because we're also looking to see if the drug, Beloranib, is able to improve hyperphagic behavior, behavior centered around food. We rely on the caregiver to report to us if those behaviors that are observed in their patients may be changing, not changing, or getting worse. So in order to do this reliably, we need one knowledgeable and dependent caregiver who can take care of the patients for the entire 6 months of the trial, at the very least, preferably for the 1 year. And for this reason, patients living in group homes for more than 50% of times would not qualify in the study, because this means that the caregiver is not with the patient often enough to be able to report behavioral changes in an accurate and reliable way. Next slide, please. During the study participation, there will be about, on average, once monthly visits to the study site. On average, I say this because in the beginning of the trial, you will probably have to come in more than once a month. And towards the end of the trial, you'll probably come in once every 2 months. So it'll average out to about once a month. Again, study drugs will be administered twice weekly by home health nurse, so you don't have to worry about preparing the study drug and injecting it on time. We'll send somebody out to your house or to your location of desire to get all this done for you. Travel-related costs will all be reimbursed, even for those who may have to come from far away. And this is for study visits. And list of participating clinical trials, study sites can be found in the website provided here, www.clinicaltrials.gov. This is a government-run, centralized website that lists all the different clinical trials that's ongoing in the United States. So if you search for Zafgen PWS as a search term at this website, you will come across our phase 3 study, which again, to remind you, is either called ZAF 311 or BEST PWS. We've purposely distributed the 15 study centers across the United States to cover all the major geographic regions. So there should be, hopefully, a study site relatively near you. But again, keeping in mind there are 15, you may be either close or hopefully within a short plane ride or maybe a long car ride within a study site. Next slide, please. Hyperphagia questionnaire. So this is what I mentioned before about how we're going to measure a patient's behavior around food. This is an important part of the study, and it's what's called one of the primary endpoints. And this is one of the things that the FDA will be looking at very closely and very carefully to see if the drug helps people. And for filling out these questionnaire, which will be done by the caregiver, mostly parents in this scenario, we ask you to please take your time and think carefully in some detail about the last 2 weeks of hyperphagic and food-related behaviors shown by the person with PWS in your care. It is important that you be very honest without minimizing or overinflating the patient's behavior because, again, this gets at the bottom of whether the drug helps people or does not help people, and we want to be as accurate as possible in this regard. And this is across all settings, not just at home, but whenever you go out or you go to a friend's house or when the child's at school or in any other circumstance it might be in. Next slide, please. So here are the questions that we ask in the questionnaire. And some of you will recognize that these are some of the things that you struggle with at home, maybe on an intermittent basis and maybe on a constant basis. Questionnaire has 9 questions, and we score each of the questions to come up with a total score, which will be evaluated at baseline versus at the end of 6 months of treatment and to see if things change for the better or worse or if they stay the same. So these questions are as follows, and these are all during the last 2 weeks, and we focus on observable behavior manifested by the patient. So during the last 2 weeks, how upset did the person generally become when denied a desired food? How often did the person try to bargain or manipulate to get more food at meals? How often did the person forage through trash for food? And how often did the person get up at night to seek food? And how persistent was the person in asking for food after being told no or no more? Next slide, please. Outside the normal meal times, how much did the person generally spend asking or talking about food? How often did the person try to sneak or steal food? When others tried to stop the person from asking about food, how distressed did he or she generally appear? How often did food-related behavior interfere with a person's normal daily activities? Now, we realize that not all of these behaviors will be manifested by everyone in your care. So, for example, if you are very careful to put all the trash away and you lock all the food and there is absolutely no opportunity for the person to steal food at home, you may not see much of this behavior at your house. But you may see this type of behavior outside your home when the child goes to school, or if you're a PWS patient in your care, maybe at a different person's house or at a relative's home. So we're just asking you to reflect upon the last 2 weeks' behavior as best as you can. And sometimes the patient in your care may steal food and you may never know about it because they were very smart about it and you never found out. And that's okay. We're just asking you to get as accurate as recall as you can. And maybe you need to talk to other people as well to get a complete reflection of what's been happening, such as school teacher, other caregivers that might look after the child, relatives that may have looked after the child, or friends. So all these things will go into finally scoring what the questionnaire total score ends up being. slide, please. I think that brings my portion of the presentation to an end. I will hand it back over to the moderator at this point, and I'm sure there'll be other questions that come up later, which we can address towards the end of the call.
Very good. Thank you so much, Doctor. Now let me pull up Dr. Miller's presentation, and we can move into that phase.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to talk about the trial that we did prior to this one called ZAP-211. This was the phase 2 trial of Beloranib in individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. Next slide. So Dr. Kim didn't talk about how Beloranib works or why we decided to try in Prader-Willi, so I just wanted to give you a little brief overview of that. So Beloranib actually works by inhibiting an enzyme called methionine aminopeptidase 2. And inhibitors of this particular enzyme reestablish the way that the body packages and metabolizes fat and reduces the production of new fatty acids and helps to convert stored fats into useful energy. So Beloranib, by targeting this enzyme, can help restore balance to the production and utilization of fat, resulting in positive metabolism for our kids, which would be hugely beneficial, as you all know. Next slide. So prior to us doing our phase 2 trial, there were several trials done on people with obesity in Australia, and all of these studies showed efficacy of the medication in terms of weight loss and in terms of decreasing their appetite and their desire for certain foods. So having learned this data, we thought it would be very useful to try it in Prader-Willi syndrome to see if we could reduce not only the weight, but also the appetite, as Dr. Kim mentioned. Next slide. So in our study, we did a 4-week randomized placebo-controlled treatment trial, followed by a 4-week open-label extension just to ensure the safety of the drug over more time. We had 17 obese adults that had Prader-Willi syndrome that were in this study. These adults all lived here in Gainesville at the ARC, which is a Prader-Willi specific dedicated group home. This home provides absolute food security. So everything is locked, there's 24/7 supervision, and they're on a very specific caloric amount that Dr. Driscoll or myself decides for these patients. When we decided to do this study, we talked with Mark Lister, who you'll hear in a minute, and other people at the ARC, and decided that because these individuals got such a limited amount of food to start with, we may not see any signals that they actually were feeling full because they were getting such a little amount of food. And we wanted to see if this drug would actually make them feel full and make them leave food on their plates. And so we decided to increase their caloric allotment so that we could see a signal of satiety if it was there. Additionally, besides that, we also looked at biomarkers like cholesterol and other cardiovascular markers. We looked at those hyperphagia-related behaviors that Dr. Kim mentioned. We looked at their body composition and, of course, their weight. And then the main thing of the trial was looking at the safety and tolerability of the drug. And what we found, we did 2 different doses. We did a placebo-controlled trial. So some people got placebo, some people got 1.2 milligrams of the drug, and some people got 1.8 milligrams of the drug. And we found in the end of the study that there was evidence that the pathway is definitely receptive to the drug in individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome, that there was definitely improvement in their hyperphagia-related behaviors, reduced body fat, and there were no safety signals that we saw at all that made us think that this drug had any problems in our population. Next slide. And so now we're going to talk about the results. Next slide. So adiponectin is a hormone that's made by fat tissue, and the more fat tissue you have, the less adiponectin you have. So the higher the adiponectin levels go, that means that you're decreasing the amount of fat tissue that you have. So you can see here in this slide that compared to placebo, both of the treatment groups had increases in the adiponectin levels at the end of the trial, showing that they had decreased fat mass. Next slide. Additionally, Dr. Kim mentioned that we're going to look at the good cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol, and the bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol. And what you can see in this slide is that the good cholesterol, the HDL, went up significantly compared to placebo in the people that were treated with the drug. And the LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, went down significantly. This is really important in terms of cardiovascular risk factor, so we were really pleased with these results. Next slide. Also, we definitely saw an improvement in hyperphagia-related behaviors. These are the things on the hyperphagia questionnaire that Dr. Kim showed you. And what we saw was that the behaviors themselves, the severity of the behaviors, and the drive for food all reduced on drug on either of the doses compared to placebo, which was excellent. And so we were very pleased to see this result, that indeed it did look like the drug was having an effect on their appetite. Next slide. We also, as I mentioned, when we looked at the adiponectin, that gave us a signal that there was a decrease in fat mass, but we also did the DEXA scans where we looked at the body fat and muscle, and what we saw was that on drug there was a significant reduction in fat mass and a little bit of an increase actually in lean body mass, which was nice to see. Next slide. Overall, their body weight went down a little. This was actually really significant to us because not only did their fat mass decrease and their body weight decrease a little bit, but remember that they were getting more calories during this study. So an individual, and most of our males were on around 1,200 calories at the beginning of the study, so they got 1,800 calories during the course of the study, and not only did they not gain weight, but they actually lost body fat during the study, which was excellent. And you'll see that in the second graph that their body mass actually went down, and this was due to the decrease in fat mass that occurred despite the fact that they were getting more calories. Next slide. We didn't see any adverse events. You can see in that picture the individuals had a great time participating in the study. They all really enjoyed it. We didn't see any sleep disturbances. This was common in the studies that were done in the obese people. Prior to our study, we saw no evidence of sleep disturbances at all and no clinically significant adverse events. And next slide just says that, we're very excited that the world of Prader-Willi is changing thanks to companies like Zapgen, who are working hard to make life better for our patients. And that's the end of my part.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mr. Lister, can we turn it over to you?
Absolutely. I was on the opposite side of this study that was done here in Gainesville than Jennifer Miller. I work at the ARC of Alachua County, where we have probably 50 to 60 people residing in our residential program with Prader-Willi syndrome. And since our study was a phase 2 study, it was much more intensive than this phase 3 study that's coming up. But we had 17 participants in the study. On our end, we actually had to go out and hire 15 part-time college students to provide extra supervision with respect to meals. Every meal was supervised one-on-one, and we measured the exact portions of all the foods that were eaten. We collected nutritional information. Our clients were going to Shands 2 times a week for different medical tests, and really, so it was much more intensive. We did see some temper tantrums as a result of the changes in routine, but I don't think that would be near as big a problem in the phase 3 study. But other than that, there really were not any drawbacks that we saw on our end. All of our clients wanted to participate in the study. We had some people that were found eligible to participate, but their guardians chose not to participate in the program. The ones who didn't participate were all disappointed. I think all of our clients enjoyed the extra attention that the study provided, both from the medical staff over at Shands and from the college students that were working with them on the meals, supervising their meals. And one of the biggest surprises to us, having worked with 20 years with people with PWS, I don't think I've ever heard anybody report being full. but we did hear that from some of our clients that they were feeling more satiated after meals, and then we actually on a handful of occasions saw people stop eating and push food away. And some of these people were very aggressive food seekers. And we had another client that at the end of our study, this was a lady who had had a very hard time losing weight. She had the typical PWS body shape. Her age is, she's older, she has very short stature, so controlling her weight is very difficult. And at the end of this study, I was looking at her, I think on the last day, and there's a really dramatic change in her body shape. And I think Jennifer mentioned that she was probably the best responder in the study to the drug, and she had lost 10% of her body fat, and she'd gained 10% of muscle, lean body mass. And then I think probably the last thing that was significant about the study from our end was that all of our clients identify with having Prader-Willi syndrome. A big part of their self-concept is wrapped up in this disorder, and I think they all felt like they were contributing to something bigger than themselves, helping out the field and other people with Prader-Willi syndrome. So I think they were all proud to be participants in the study. And so anyway, those are my comments about the study from being on the other side.
Very good. We have quite a few questions that have come in. So let me start with
Julie?
first. Are there any exceptions to the age? We have a person who's got an 11-year-old son that would meet all the criteria but is 11.
Okay, I can answer that question. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. So exceptions cannot be made, unfortunately, when it comes to age, because that's a FDA guidance that we have to follow based on the experiments that we've done in animals and in these prior human trials. So if somebody is close to being 12, we could work with you because it takes about a month or two to get through the screening process and to actually start receiving study drug. So if your son is almost 12 and only 1 or 2 months remaining till he turns 12, then we can work with you there. But otherwise, he may have to wait for the next set of trials.
Okay. Next question is, so without a chromosome 15 deletion and with a diagnosis of atypical Prader-Willi syndrome, a person would not qualify for the study?
I'm not sure what they mean when they say atypical Prader-Willi, and Jennifer, you might be able to answer this question better, but we do need to have genetic diagnosis, either through microdeletion or uniparental disomy.
Right, so a lot of times people are called atypical when they have what we call Prader-Willi-like, that they have many, many features of Prader-Willi syndrome, but not genetically confirmed Prader-Willi. And in that case, unfortunately, no, they do not qualify for this trial.
Okay. Does growth hormone have to be stopped during the study?
Excellent question. And
absolutely not.
Yeah, no. There are many no problem. There are many medications we realize that patients with Prader-Willi syndrome take, not only growth hormone, but many other hormone replacement therapies, as well as mood stabilizing drugs. And because the drug needs to be tested in a real-world setting, we are allowing almost all medications that patients are usually on, as long as the doses of the medication has been stable for 3 to 6 months, depending on the drug. So we wouldn't like to have drugs that just started just recently, because that could obviously impact some of the endpoints of the study, or things to change in the middle of the trial, we would like to minimize those kind of things. But as long as things are stable, yes, they're all allowed.
Our son is pretty good when with us because of our structure, but has many of these behaviors when with others. How would you rate it under these circumstances?
So we are looking for, and this is one of the things I failed to mention, we are looking for patients who manifest some degree, at very least, some degree of hyperphagic behavior. Because again, this is one of the endpoints that we would like to see an improvement. And if we had patients without any of these hyperphagic behavior, then it would be very difficult to show an improvement. Having said that, I know that you can't observe your child 24/7. As best as you can, we ask you to report the behaviors you've observed, and also behaviors that you may not have observed, where you may have been told by your friends or your teachers or other caregivers that you believe or that you trust, who may have told you, this patient or the child went through trash to get food or stole food. If those reports are being made to you by a reliable source, I would use those incidences to answer some of these questions appropriately. So as an example, if your child went to another friend's house and stole food, and was a parent of that house reported that to you, or you asked and they told you, and the source of the information is considered to be reliable from your perspective, I would answer that question on the questionnaire as if that, as appropriate to reflect the behavior that you heard.
Okay. Is the participant permitted to be on an exercise program during the study?
The answer is yes. They can be on any type of exercise diet program, but we would ask you not to start a new one, and that program has to be stable throughout the trial, because again, this is what we call a confounder, an external factor that can impact what we're trying to see with the drug. So we would like to have most of the things as stable as possible without changing too much. Diet and exercise program obviously having a potential impact on the body weight endpoint in the study, we would ask that this particular participation in the program be stable throughout the study and stable even before coming into the study for about 3 to 6 months.
Right? Were any side effects noticed from the first 2 phases of the study? And once you're on the medications, do you have to go lifelong on it?
So again, one of the things I failed to mention, which I should have, is the extent of drug exposure that we've had with Beloranib. So we've studied Beloranib now in about 6, 7 clinical trials across about 200 patients that have been given the drug. Most of these patients are patients without Prader-Willi syndrome. So these are patients with what I would call conventional obesity. We only have tested the drug in 1 trial with Prader-Willi syndrome, and that's the study that Dr. Miller just stepped through. So it appears that the most common adverse events that we see with the drug, based on this swath of clinical experience that we've had, is first of all sleep disturbance, and this is why Dr. Miller mentioned sleep disturbance as a particular adverse event that was not observed in the phase 2 trial. We do observe it in patients without Prader-Willi syndrome, and the sleep disturbance we see is mostly taking longer to fall asleep at night. That's the most common sleep disturbance reported as an adverse event. Now, in patients with Prader-Willi syndrome, it wasn't too surprising to us that we didn't see a lot of this, because Prader-Willi syndrome patients are often very sleepy or are super sleepers. They fall asleep very quickly at night, and the drug appeared not to really have touched that aspect of sleep habit in patients with Prader-Willi syndrome. We also see some mild degrees of nausea and vomiting in patients without Prader-Willi syndrome when we increase the dose to a higher level. But again, this was not observed in patients with Prader-Willi syndrome, probably because patients with Prader-Willi syndrome tend not to get nauseous and tend not to vomit. So the profile, the side effect profile of the drug appears to fit the clinical manifestation of Prader-Willi syndrome very well. And so far, we've not seen really much adverse events to speak of in patients with Prader-Willi in response to the drug.
And did we address the question on whether they would be on it lifelong?
You know, in the clinical trials, they will be on the drug as long as 1 year. Now, one of the reasons why we have to test the drug and its safety and efficacy over a 1 year period is because that's what the FDA requires for a drug that's intended to be taken chronically, potentially lifelong. And that's no different than when you compare to, you know, high blood pressure medication, high cholesterol medications, or diabetes medications. These are drugs intended to be taken essentially for the lifelong duration of the patient, unless if things dramatically improve and they can come off the drug. Those instances have occurred, but those are very unusual.
Doctor, if this trial is successful, how long do you project before this drug will be on the market?
Yeah, that's, again, another excellent question, but very difficult question to answer because it could be quite variable. If I will give you kind of the bookend scenario. This drug, if it's shown to be very efficacious and very safe and well tolerated in the current trial that's ongoing, the drug could potentially be on the market and be FDA approved as early as middle to end of 2016. So towards the middle to latter half of next year. That's, I think, what we call a best case scenario for us and of course for the patients and the caregivers. But it can take many, many more years after that to get FDA approval if things don't go so well. And it's not unusual for a drug to finish phase 3 study and take few to several years before it gets FDA approval, depending on the results that are shown. So those are some of the those are kind of the examples of two extreme scenarios. We think that most likely scenario is that the drug can be available within the next 2 to 3 years. But again,
Go ahead.
Part of how soon we can get the drug approved by the FDA is based on how soon we can get the study recruited, fully recruited, and finished. And that depends on your level of participation and how many patients will raise their hands and say, I would like to, enroll into the trial. Because the earlier we can fully recruit the study, the earlier we can finish the 6 and 12 months of observation.
All right. Are there any exceptions to the BMI? The questioner has a 21-year-old daughter that is at a 22.9.
Yeah, we have provided some exceptions to the BMI, and we will likely do so going forward. However, 22.5 would be a little bit too, quote-unquote, normal. We are looking for patients who are carrying extra body fat so that we have an opportunity to improve that with the drug. And so we may provide some exceptions around the margins. So if somebody, right now the BMI criteria for entry is 30 to 60, and somebody had a BMI of 28, 29, we may make exceptions there. Or if somebody had a BMI of 61, 62, 63, we may make exceptions there on an individualized basis. But 22.5 would be just way too normal, and we probably wouldn't provide an exception in that case.
Next question. I noticed the second dosage in the new trial is 2.4 milligrams versus 1.8 milligrams in the trial with Dr. Miller. Could you share any expectations or hypotheses you are testing in the different dosage?
That's a very insightful question. We had tested 2.4, or we actually have tested doses as high as 6 milligrams in prior trials. All the doses that we've tested so far, up to 6 milligrams, have been shown to be safe. However, higher the dose we take, sometimes we run into tolerability problems. Again, primarily, as I've talked about before, sleep disturbance and some degree of nausea and vomiting. Now, when we conducted the phase 2 trial with Dr. Miller, we wanted to tread lightly or carefully and start with a lower dose. So we tested 1.2 and 1.8. After having seen that 1.8 was more effective than 1.2, yet both doses were well tolerated, it was our proposal to the FDA that we increase the dose exposure to 1.8 and 2.4 in the phase 3 study. And the FDA agreed that that was appropriate. And so our hypothesis, to answer the question directly, is that 2.4 will be more effective than 1.8, but that 2.4 should be still well tolerated, especially because we are doing a dose titration scheme where patients will receive the lower dose if they are randomized to receive drug. They will start with a lower dose and then go up to the higher dose if they get randomized to the higher dose. So that will also improve tolerability. And so our hypothesis is that 2.4 will be a more efficacious dose than 1.8, and it should be well tolerated and safe.
Does the trial begin when all the participants are recruited, or is it a rolling admission to the study?
It is a rolling admission to the study. So there are patients who were enrolled into the study as early as September of 2014. So these patients have been in the trial for now 4 or 5 months and have been taking study drug or placebo for the last 4 or 5 months. And we anticipate that the study will continue to enroll till about March, April timeframe of this year. But that's just a projection. We don't know exactly how things will go. If the study enrolls very quickly, we may shut it down earlier. If the enrollment goes slowly, we may have to keep it open a little bit longer.
Are you exploring trials or testing and or approval in countries outside the United States?
Yes, these are great questions. We are starting a second trial, a second phase 3 trial in Prader-Willi syndrome in Europe sometime in the middle of this year, likely sometime in June, July, August timeframe. We will go to several countries in Europe. We don't know exactly which ones yet, but they will likely be the major countries in Europe, such as England, Italy, France, Germany, and so forth. And that particular trial will likely enroll about 150 patients, and it'll be a 1-year placebo-controlled blinded trial compared to a U.S. trial, which is only a 6-month placebo-controlled blinded trial.
Let's see. At the conclusion of the study, would the parent be informed which treatment group their child was in?
Yes, that will happen, except it will probably take a while. We don't know exactly how long after the study is completed when you can find that out. And this is because until a certain study completion procedures are done, we can't unblind the patient or the study site personnel as to who was on drug and who wasn't. An example of this is, for example, after the study is completed, sometimes we have to go back into the database and ask whether a certain adverse event had occurred a certain way. If we don't know all the details about a particular adverse event, we may have to go back to the investigator or even the patient to find out more about that particular adverse event. And if the patient or the investigator knows if the patient was on drug or placebo, that will bias the reporting of the details of that particular adverse event. So we wait a certain amount of time after the study is completed before we unblind everybody.
What was the target caloric intake before and during the study for the subjects?
I think the question is referring to the phase 2 study that Dr. Miller ran with us. And it was, if that is the case, this caloric target was individualized per patient. So if it was determined that the patient only needed to be on 1,000 calories a day to maintain his or her body weight, during that trial, we increased the calorie intake by 50%. So for the duration of the trial, that patient would have been on 1,500 calories during the study. So, but that's just an example. Everyone had kind of different baseline calorie requirements and different calorie targets during the participation of the trial.
And I want to make clear that during, sorry, Julie, during this phase 3 trial, we're not setting caloric restrictions. We want people to continue their current diet and, as Dennis said, their current exercise program as they have been doing at home prior to the trial. We want to not change things because we want to see the effect of the drug in the real world environment.
Yeah, that's an important point. Thank you for that. Obviously, if the patient during the study participation doesn't feel as hungry and doesn't want to eat, then of course you shouldn't force feed the patient just to keep things sane. But Dr. Miller is right. We're not targeting any specific calorie intake during the phase 3 study.
Okay, we have a nutrition question. Aside from behavioral tracking on the study, will there be any investigation on the specific type of foods that participants are eating?
It's a very good question, and we've tried to do that in prior trials. That is pretty difficult thing to do in a phase 3 study because it's not easy to track what patients are eating and how much of their eating of that particular type of food in an accurate fashion for an outpatient study. Patients usually do their best, but without a nutrition or dietitian helping them along the way, these reports generally are not very accurate. So it's not very well accepted, and it's not something that we will be doing in phase 3 studies.
Do you have a history on how this drug came to be used for obesity management?
Great question. It was some of the early work by our founding fathers of our company that thought that methionine aminopeptidase 2 inhibition may lead to weight loss, and that initial hypothesis was borne out in animals, different animal models of obesity, and we started to test that hypothesis in humans, and it's been borne out 6-7 times over again in the 6-7 different clinical trials that we've conducted to date.
We're wrapping up on the questions. Let me see. I just lost my place. This questioner has a child that she thinks would be very a good candidate, but is scared of needles. Do you witness this in your trials already? Was there a way around it? And do you see this later being implemented in a pill form?
We've not run into this problem very frequently. I actually can't even remember one case where this has occurred. Mostly because patients with Prader-Willi syndrome, many of them are already on injectable therapies such as growth hormone or insulin or other types of injectable therapy. The injection is provided by a healthcare professional, a nurse, that'll be coming to your house twice weekly. So I can see how if somebody was injection naive, first couple times might be a little bit difficult, but after that they would get used to it pretty quickly. This will not be available in a pill form anytime soon. I mean, I can't say that it's impossible, but I don't think that's going to occur because this drug, unfortunately, is not stable in the stomach when you give it through orally. So it has to be given by injectable therapy, and twice weekly injectable is usually something that most of our patients have been accepting without much of a problem.
Very good. I'd like to invite Jana-Lee Heineman to share a couple words before we close this evening's webinar.
I would just like to encourage families to consider it, or if they know their child's not eligible, to think of other families maybe in their state that might be eligible, that they can explain this a little better too, that we get the word out. I think we all know, you wouldn't be on this webinar if you didn't know that this is significant. This is probably the most significant clinical trial we have seen. I know it is in the 30 years I've been involved. So I think it's important we all do what we can to, you know, if we can, I know a lot of parents are frustrated their children aren't eligible because of BMI or hyperphagia drive not as strong as it for the questionnaire. But you can help by making sure other people you know have the accurate information on it and encourage them to consider it. And we will, if your child's not eligible, we'll still keep you in touch with how it's going and the results. And you know, we're closer than we've ever been to a positive result of something to help the hyperphagia, and that's really exciting. So we thank you for being interested enough to be on this webinar tonight.
And I did skip 2 questions. Can you indulge me, Dr. Kim, for the last 2?
Of course, I think we have time.
All right, very good.
So no problem. Yeah.
Will 100 patients be considered statistically significant?
Wow, I think maybe we have a scientist amongst the group.
We might.
Great, great question. Yes, and the study is set up to maximize our chances of showing statistical significant difference between patients who take drug versus placebo at the end of 6-month observation period. Now, of course, that our ability to see statistical significance all depends on how the drug performs. If it in fact does reduce body weight by a significant amount, or if it improves hyperphagic behavior by a certain amount, then we are assured of seeing statistical significance. And that's what it's a very relevant question because it's what the FDA will look for is statistical significance at the end of this trial.
And finally, there are other weight loss drugs. I thought this medication was supposed to eliminate the constant hunger. The requirement of obesity will eliminate people that could benefit and could be a great test to see if not only the drug can cause weight loss, but can eliminate insatiability. Can you comment?
It's an excellent question. Well, these questions are very impressive because they get at exactly what we've been struggling with and some of the things that some of the difficult decisions we've had to make. I agree that patients who may not have obesity but who have insatiable hunger may benefit from the drug if the drug is proven to be effective for that. However, after talking with the FDA, you know, we have to work with the FDA to come up with endpoints that matter. And since we're studying the effects of the drug on body weight and hyperphagic behavior, unfortunately for this particular trial, we are looking for patients who carry extra body fat on their body. But that doesn't eliminate the possibility of the patients being able to take this drug even without obesity if the drug eventually becomes FDA approved and is available for usage by prescription. It's also possible that even before the drug is FDA approved, that we may run another trial that we're thinking about where we can study the drug in patients without obesity who have normal body weight, who suffer from extreme hyperphagia or extreme insatiable hunger. So that hasn't been ruled out yet. But for this current trial, that is unfortunately not something that we can do.
Once the FDA approves the drug, will it be offered to children under the age of 12?
Immediately speaking, no. We have to demonstrate, and of course this is the responsible thing to do, that this drug is still safe and effective in children under the age of 12. And we will be doing that very shortly. But that takes time and that takes care because these are arguably more vulnerable patients. These are patients below the age of 12. So we have some extra work that we got to do to make sure that we are introducing the drug in a careful way to not harm anybody. And we're forecasting to study patients between ages of 7 and 12. Once this particular study is done with, then we can have more confidence with a lot of data that we collected from this current trial to inform our design and dose selection for the next study in patients in between the ages of 7 and 12. So that'll come along a little bit later. That'll lag behind the initial FDA approval, but hopefully it won't lag behind too long. Hopefully within a few years, we'll be able to lower the age of the prescription eligibility.
And our final question is, will study participants be given documentation that they can review with their primary care physicians?
Yes, I'm not sure specifically what is meant by documentation, but patients will certainly be given an informed consent form where it lays out all the pros and cons of participating in the study and the fact that they can withdraw from the study anytime they would like. This is completely voluntary. And if there are certain lab tests and so forth or body weight documentation that the patient would like, we can talk about those things on an individual basis.
Very good. Well, I'm sure I'm echoing the sentiments of our audience to all of our presenters in great appreciation, not only for the work that you're doing that potentially is life-changing to all of our loved ones with the syndrome, but as well as the time that you've given to share this information with our families tonight. We did record the webinar, so if you would like to review it or if you know of a person that was not able to view it, the link to that will be on our website and will be posted on our Facebook tomorrow. And I want to thank all of our participants and all of our audience. We'll be signing off now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.